Hey everybody, I'm Brianna Mason and we are here with Buck today. I want to first let you guys know that Buck has a new name change and we will now still have the same acronym, but it will be the block under construction, right? So we're thinking about everything in the built environment, how everything plays together and how everybody comes together to make a community. I want to first pass it over to Michael and Chi Chi to introduce themselves, and then we can get into the topic for the day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bree. My name is Mike Randall. I'm a planner in the city of Detroit. I primarily work in the space of public health, and I'm so happy to be talking about this today. We really need more opportunities to share information of ways in which we can develop our communities to be more sustainable and more inclusive. So yeah, I'm excited about the conversation.
And I am Chisada Brown, Chi Chi for short. I am actually a civil engineer, but a planner at heart. I'm passionate about people and public spaces and making sure that people of color have what they deserve when it comes to resources and amenities in the community.
And then I'll also just say that I'm also a planner, trained planner, used to work for the city of Detroit, and now work for a national nonprofit that focuses on affordable housing. Speaking of housing, right? We wanted to bring a conversation today about Airbnbs, right? Everybody has one, everybody has utilized one. But have you thought about what that means for the community and how that could play into community uplifting? So one of the articles that we were talking about recently was from Quartz, and the article was from a lady named Ann Quito. I hope that I'm saying her name right. She is a design and architecture reporter, and she was writing about a city in Japan where they talk about a tiny house that has been used to like uplift the community and teach people about healthy cities. So with that being said, I want to open up the conversation with saying how I discovered this conversation in the first place. I was actually not even looking at articles. I was actually on Netflix and watching this amazing show called Amazing Vacation Rentals. It's one of my favorite shows. Really cool, different price budgets for different places to stay. And this came up. So they went to stay in a remote village in Japan. And in this, village, they stayed at a tiny house where the community actually came together to show them the house, make sure that they got checked in. They had some local amenities, such as the chef that came in from the local village who fed them. And then they also talked about some of the community related activities that they've thrown inside of this house, right? It immediately made me think, why are we not doing this in Detroit? Why are we not doing this in our neighborhoods when we really can utilize some of these tools to uplift our community?
Awesome. Well, you want anyone can just hop right in? Okay. Well, I thought the article was fascinating. I think that when you look at urban problems, typically we take an American approach to urban issues like blight and vacancy, but it was really cool to look at an international perspective of just the urbanization of society in general. So humankind, it's happening everywhere. The article talked a lot about millennials and Gen Z, leaving their sleepy towns and going into the city to look for work. And it's left a lot of these beautiful villages and small towns literally vacant. The government was, creating huge incentives all the way up to free housing for individuals who would just contribute to the tax base. So it was really interesting to look at an international perspective, but, to your point, we're still dealing with a lot of that here in the city of Detroit. And so how can an Airbnb, or, short-term rental spaces attract people, like more like a tourist destination. I don't think people really look at Detroit as a tourist destination. It absolutely is. We have a lot of history here. So, while I was reading the article, all of these ideas started popping up. Like, how amazing would it be to have like a neighborhood that has been completely rebuilt and restored to its 1930s or 1940s mystique, right? And have people come and experience a community as it was maybe in the heyday of the auto industry or the heyday of Motown or something like that. I think that it's possible, right? And just with a little creativity and ingenuity, bringing some of these things to life. So that's kind of some of the gears that started spinning in my head when I was reading it.
And listening to like both of you, like I'm like, dang, I should get a pen and paper because I got so much to say and I want to make sure I get it all out. Okay, so it's funny you say that. So when I was reviewing like the information about that particular project in Japan, what I was thinking about was certain places. So when I think about culture, right? Certain cultures and certain places already have a strong, like a core value of community. And it's like, okay, if I have, then my neighbor is going to have. And if something goes down where one neighbor is being, oppressed, then I'm going to, be in the fight with them, whatever that means for whatever situation that is, right? And so, whoo, this is a lot. Oh God, I feel like I'm about to go down a rabbit hole. But I think that particularly speaking about people of color in America, and I can only speak from the perspective of a Black person living in, the Midwest, born and raised in Detroit, there has to be an identity established first. Like, I feel like we have to know what our identity is, then we can connect and tap into like the community piece. Because I will say, I used to do like these Airbnb tours like 2 years ago, these mural tours or whatever. And so there was a certain business that I wanted to partner with to create like a more, what do I want to say, like comprehensive experience, right? And so the response I got was like, well, I'm already doing that, so I don't really know how you and I are going to fit, as if I was trying to take away from, what it was that what they were doing. In my mind, I'm thinking like, this will be a really cool experience, because I was getting people, when I say all over the world, like all over the world. And I was like, man, I could do this and I could do that to, show them more parts of Detroit and stuff. So, talking about this, community who was able to develop this, co-op, they already had a sense of community. Like, they already had a sense of, okay, the woodworker is going to do this. The chef is going to do this. Like, this other person, these students, they're going to do this. Like, there was already this connection that they had. And I think that comes from, the culture. Yeah. And not to say that we don't have that here, because I do think, like, I think about the three of us, like that, like we represent a community, like we could represent like that connection or that sense of, hey, let's start something, let's work together. I think that we do have that here, but like we would definitely need to have something like that, like on a grander scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
In order to pull that off successfully. Now, I do think, and we can talk about this after, we wrap up here, but there are things like, now that we're having this conversation, I'm like, okay, now I see how I could possibly repitch this to this particular, business, thinking about it in the way that Japan did with this Airbnb house or whatever. Mm-hmm. But those were some of the things that came to my mind as you guys were like saying things like, first we need to like have an identity of who we are.
Yeah.
And not to get too deep, but just for us to see that, okay, we're connected, like we can build this. Mm-hmm. And I'm not taking anything away from you. Like, this is going to be like a partnership.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to, especially with Detroit being 80% African American, right? It goes back to the uplifting of each other as Black people, right? And what we're
Yeah.
standing for and what we want to do. A lot of times people are like, I'm gonna wait on the city. The city needs to do this. The city needs to do that. And it's like, well, no, if you just talk to your neighbor, maybe you and your neighbor can get this going, and
Yeah.
then the city will come. You know what I'm saying? Be like, oh, okay, well, y'all are doing a great job, blah, blah, blah. Let's assist. And I know it shouldn't be that way, but at the same time, it's like, how many times are you sitting in a room and you're saying, I'm going to wait on the next person? I'm going to wait till they do something before I act. And if you think about back in the day, that's not how, our communities were doing things. We really came together, even if it was at church or whatever the case may be, and said, hey, we need to stick together as a group. We need to make sure we are uplifting each other, so that we can move the neighborhood forward. Like you think about Black Wall Street, right? You think about how they banded together for years, even though, it didn't last, because of racial tension, racial issues. There was a period of time where there were, places where Black people could eat, places where they could get entertainment, taxi driving services, transportation related services, specifically for people of color. And there is this opportunity here in Detroit where there are so many communities that have rich history, rich knowledge. You have folks who have been living here for 30, 40, 50 years who have so much knowledge that could really pump out that tourist mentality in these neighborhoods, right? And also just give each other an opportunity to figure out how to drive the local economy in a neighborhood local focus. Not thinking about like the whole city, but just saying, hey, like I don't have to necessarily leave my neighborhood to make money, and to be able to show people why my neighborhood is so dope.
Yeah. No, I agree with both of you all. And Chichi, to your point, that needing that identity, needing that fabric that binds. I think that in the community in Japan, it was a sequoia tree. Like that was like almost sacred. You know what I mean? And then everything was kind of binded around that. And it doesn't have to be necessarily something that tangible like that, but it needs to be some type of cohesive identity. And Bree, to your point about Black Wall Street and just having something to fight for, right? We don't have a lot of that, and so a lot of this is going to be building, right? But also that takes a sense of identity and a binding culture to move forward together. Do you think that any of this can develop into actual policy, right? Like that's what I think about. Like I think about like policy, right? And having a tourist kind of visitors bureau push for the city of Detroit. It would take a level of policy and connectivity between institutions. And so, do you think that the city is ready for something like that? And if so, what would that look like?
I do not think that they're ready yet. And the reason why I say this is just like, because if you go to other cities, right, they have actual organizations that specifically focus on tourism in the, city, whatever city it is, whether it's Chicago, LA, whatever. Yeah. And so we do not have that here in Detroit. However, there are so many gems that we have in Detroit that it's really easy for it to come together. It's just more about like getting the meat on the bone, right? Like there is no backbone to like kind of push this forward. And if there was something like that, you wouldn't have like certain programs leaving the city. Like, we think about what is it called? Winterfest. Like that is now going to be in Royal Oak instead of downtown Detroit, where that was a staple in downtown Detroit for years. Or you think about the Taste Fest or things like that. Those types of things could be happening in Detroit if we had some type of organization that was established here in Detroit, focusing on that, driving, that tourist economy. But I think that what needs to happen first is just like that establishment, the establishment of some type of organization that can do that. Because I think that there is this impression that if you have Airbnbs or rental facilities in your neighborhood, that it drives down the neighborhood, right? Whereas if you think about it in a economic way, and if you think about it in a way where you say, hey, look, we're coming together as a community, and as a good neighbor, like this type of forum can exist, this type of property can exist, but here are some staples that we have to follow. Like, music got to be shut off at 10 o'clock or whatever the case may be. Then it'll be fine, because then you're saying, hey, this type of thing is allowable in my neighborhood, but with restrictions that make sense for someone who lives here every day.
Right. And I think like when you talk about policy, I know at one point in time, like Detroit, when Airbnb first got on, I would say, I don't want to say first got on the scene in the city, but when it became something, like there was that whole thing where the city was just like, no, this is not allowable because it doesn't meet X, Y, and Z criteria. Mm-hmm. And so, like there was a lot of that. A part of it is, which I get from maybe like a public safety standpoint and, all these other things that come into play, like when you're thinking about a dwelling, right? If I'm saying that I'm allowing someone to temporarily rent out their space, and their space, like they haven't met X, Y, and Z criteria in regards to safety and health and all these things, it's like, I get it. But at the same time, when we're talking about, hey, we're trying to, boost the economy by, creating small business opportunities for, homeowners or property owners and things like that, instead of saying no, like what should the conversation be? So when we're having those conversations about like policy and how do we get these things, enacted and off the ground for people to, take it and run with, how do we have those conversations? Is it as simple as, Bree, what you just mentioned, like, okay, the noise ordinance, is it, do we have to have conversations with the building department in terms of like occupancy, you know what I'm saying? Like those kinds of things. I think that, like the first step is, when we think about government and policy is like, don't just say no, let's come up with viable solutions that, maybe as a property owner, like I'm going to feel like, I don't want to do all of that. However, I'm willing to meet you in the middle because this is going to give me an opportunity, to make some money, which in turn, at the end of the day, is helping the city out. I also think like, we talk about this all the time, Bree. I feel like one of your specialties is capacity building, with organizations. So when I think about piloting something like, what Japan did, I think about, okay, like, I feel like I should be able to, without thinking of like the larger organizations, like the smaller organizations, like, well, what small organizations would I even be able to identify within the city who would be able to do something like that? And I feel like maybe the desire after maybe, having a conversation or something like that, I feel like the desire will be there, but would said organization have the capacity, you know what I'm saying, to do something like that? And again, going back to Japan as the example, the lifestyle, you know what I mean, was just, it seems so different. It's kind of like, when you go to certain places, like there are those like, what am I trying to say? Like locals who, like in their example, like there was a woodworker and there was a chef and there was a this and there was a that. Like, how would you identify those types of resources? Obviously, they would be a little different here.
Yeah.
But I feel like that also is like made the experience as well.
It did. And I love that, Gigi, because like, what are our local, like, who are our locals? You know what I mean? Like, who are those people? Like, who are those gatekeepers? Mm-hmm. Those surrogates of the community, right? they're here. They are 100% here. I mean, this neighborhood that I live in, like, you meet them very soon when you move into these communities. And so it's just about identifying those individuals. And I don't think that it has to be like unanimous. Like, it doesn't have to be like everybody on board, right? You just got to get the old guards. You got to get the people who, are going to take the time, use their capital, whatever it may be. It may be relationships, it may be, capital building, it may be, capacity building, it may be relationships, or it may be funds, right? But I think that for starters, just identifying who those pillars are in the community, and then creating a coalition to kind of bring these things about. I think there could absolutely be a thriving, like, identified Airbnb in my neighborhood that is managed by several different entities in the community, and offer a business opportunity for individuals. I can absolutely see that. I live in North Rosedale, so this community is definitely very cohesive. You know what I mean? But I could also see it in other areas as well. Creating things from the ground up, right? And creating maybe like a village of, small houses and things like that. I think it is definitely possible if you just identify those individuals and give them a stake in the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I agree there too. I mean, I think that that's the part of us being planners, right? Like, I think the first step is identifying, like Michael said, and like you said, Chi, who in the neighborhood pretty much knows the lay of the land, knows how people actually feel about things, right? And from those neighborhoods, figuring out how we can gather together as a collective to understand what types of things are concerns and what types of things are just like myths, right? Like, these are some assumptions that we have based on what we've heard about Airbnbs or, these types of dwellings. And how can we combat those things in the neighborhoods that we actually live in, while also being able to allow this to drive the economy? And then I also think about, like, could there be community amenities that benefit the community in a way where, it's not just like a take from the neighborhood. Like, I'm taking your history and I'm taking this dwelling and utilizing it to make money off of it, but I'm also providing something to the community that can benefit everybody based on, just whatever. Like, I think about, for example, Russell Woods and Arden Park. That's the neighborhood I used to be a planner for. And I think about all the history and all of the artists that came out of that neighborhood that were Motown greats. I think about some of the places that my neighbors talked about in terms of just, speakeasies and jazz scenes and, Saunders ice cream, those types of places. There was a bowling alley, there was theaters, opera theaters that, like things like that. They used to actually be on Dexter in the hood, in the neighborhood. Like, the way that we look at it now, because it's all gone, is something that, could be relived in a different way, right? Like, what if we marked those sites and those sites had old pictures of what used to be, right? Or what if there was an annual event that happened on certain sites based on the activity that used to be in that special space? So thinking about like speakeasies or whatever. And then when you have those tourists or folks that come in to visit that neighborhood, they're actually getting a piece of the history that used to be there. And maybe that's the only time of the year where this is an allowable situation, where the community comes together and makes this an allowable use. But any other time of year, like, that's not cool. Just like this summer, between June and August, we'll allow this because we have activities going on specifically related to the history of the neighborhood. But I just think that way. Of course, someone who has lived there forever may not think that way or feel that way. And it's just kind of like finding that balance.
Yeah, and getting, when you say like finding that balance and getting the supporters, and getting those people and organizations who do support or who are going to champion like what it is you're trying to do. Like I said, I do think we have that, but it just goes back to like the piece about identifying who those people are and who those organizations are. And like, just getting to work at the end of the day. Because there is like this, I feel like this topic could go on forever because there is lots of work to do. There's plenty of, because I could think of a neighborhood, and I know we all talked about this before. For me, it would be Brightmoor. And I was saying like, because Brightmoor has all of this, I feel like land and vacancy, but a lot of people in the neighborhood have turned those spaces into like urban farms. There are like tons of like urban farms in that area. And if you drive through there, especially, like in the spring and summer, you'll see people out like on the farm. There's actually like a cedar chip or wood chip trail that they have in like one of the alleys, and it's like for their chicken feeding. When I went through there like this past summer, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like every time I come over here, I'm seeing, something new. So even thinking about that, like that's an experience in itself. And thinking about that community in particular, like they have the space and they do have what I would consider residents who feel strongly about, land use and repurposing the land, for the people and for their community. So,
I mean, thinking about Brightmoor, I think that there's definitely a planning solution to that. Like, I think that, and that might be a whole nother other topic, just, the land use zoning and just master planning, and that can go on and on and on. But I do think that there's a land use solution to bringing about these opportunities to like a place like Brightmoor, right? Because it has so much vacancy, but it also has infrastructure. Like it has, the electricity, it has the water, it has everything there to potentially be tapped into for a great opportunity. But I think what planning does is it's like a sweeping mechanism. So you don't necessarily have to have, again, a unanimous consensus when a planning department or commission or whatever comes out with with land use recommendations and zoning ordinances and whatnot. It just is what it is. And so then that gives developers an opportunity to come in and take advantage of things. And then you look at, tax abatement and other things and opportunity zones and all the things that kind of overlay that is what creates opportunities. And I think that's why I love planning, because again, it's like that, not a magic wand, but it kind of like alakadabra, whatever. And then boom, it's like, that's the land use. It is what it is. That's what we're doing. And I'm thinking about Flint right now with their master plan for sustainability and all of their planning is kind of like a switch, right? It's like, if this is the demand, boom, this is what we're going to switch on. If the demand changes back to housing, we're going to switch it off and it's going to be housing again, right? And so I think that when planning can be malleable like that, a lot of great things can happen.
I always talk about planning being a lasagna, right? There's so many different layers to it. And if you layer on certain things in a certain order, they can actually have a very beneficial impact on neighborhoods. And also too, it could put people in a place where they feel like, this is something that involves me, that I'm a part of, that my children will be a part of, that this, all of these things will eventually come together to actually cause my neighborhood to either be uplifted or to be recognized or to just simply be, right? Like, because you think about some areas that people have written off, And then you look 20, 30 years later and that area is booming. You know, like if you think about Midtown Detroit 20 years ago, and you look at Midtown today, it's two totally different situations.
Brush Park. I mean, look at Brush Park. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, and so never count out humans. Like never count out humans. And really that's what land use is all about. It's about humans. And so it's so funny, like when I talk to, you know, people who are so nearsighted about things, I'm like, you have no idea. Like humans come along and they see value where you see nothing, and boom, right? And all all it takes is an influx of individuals that are like-minded, and over the course of a decade, everything can change, right? And just study world history,
Right.
Yeah, and I feel like we get a lot of that in Detroit. It's like, oh no, it'll always, no, it won't. No, it will not. Not even in our lifetime. I think even in our lifetime, this city is going to be dramatically different. And that's just not, optimism, for the sake of. That's just looking at history and looking at, the trajectory of human settlement and what we've done with land. I mean, we just tend to renew things. It's just, the cycle of things.
You brought up a good point. And I know like we're gonna like be wrapping up in a minute, but I just want to say this. Like you brought up a good point about people being nearsighted. Like I will say that in professional spaces, I'm not gonna say where, and I'm not gonna say who, but it would really irritate me when I would hear people say like, oh yeah, and people who are, within our professional space, I want to say it so bad, but I'm not. Anyway, would say like things like, "Oh, that's not going to happen there ever. Or that's not going to happen there for X, Y, and Z." I'm like, how are you leading these efforts and you don't even like you're talking like that? Like that would, child, that would irritate me. I'm like,
we gotta get them out. We gotta smoke them out.
Yeah,
you should not be in this space if you're that nearsighted.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that would drive me crazy. I would be like, why are you even here then? If you can't see it, and if you're saying, well, it doesn't have this, okay, it might not have that now, that doesn't mean that it's not gonna ever happen. And then why, let's dive deep and say why you don't think it's gonna happen. That's a whole nother subject when we want to talk about people who want to invest.
Think about the train station. And Ford buying the train station and has been renovating the train station. Nobody
saw that coming. Nobody saw that coming even 5 years ago. Nobody would say that the Ford Motor Company would do an autonomous vehicle campus using the train station. Nobody would say that in a complete sentence. Nobody. And now they thought the Maroon family had that in their grips forever, right? Because nearsighted people, right? And then here you go, this great opportunity. And now it's going to be so amazing to see the new generation of people enjoy that site. And they're never going to know. They're never going to know. They're going to think it was like that the whole time.
And enjoy it in a new way, right? Yep. Enjoy it in a new way. Because our parents was riding the trains.
Yep. I know my mom always that story all the time. Like I used to go pick up my.
But the thing about it is, like, I always look at it like, what are the bones? Like, how's the structure, right? Like talking about Brightmoor, infrastructure. They got infrastructure under the pavement. Even though you don't see it, it's there, right? And so it's almost like a socket. All you plug it in, it's gonna light up. You know what I mean? So that's what's there, right? And then the old train station, right? The bones of that building were forever almost. It was like one of them Roman buildings or whatever. Like, I mean, look at the architecture, right? That building wasn't going anywhere. And so all it took was the right, organization with the right vision to say, you know what? It has good bones. I'm going to use it, right? And so, that's kind of what I look at. But yeah, we got to smoke those people out. Get them out of
here. Oh, sorry, Mike.
I'm not.
I was just gonna say, so to close, I'm gonna just sum up what I've heard today, and you guys can sum up what you guys have heard. And I thank everybody for listening to this conversation, because it folds into everything that we do, right? We might not necessarily be traditional planners, but everything that we do has a planning impact. And I want to just talk about, like, we started this conversation talking about a village in Japan, in Yoshino area that really focuses on this Airbnb being a driver for economic development in the neighborhoods, as well as bringing community together for tourism. We talked about there being, like Michael would say, good bones and infrastructure in Detroit, but it's all kind of piecemeal, right? Everybody's doing their own thing. They're not coming together to kind of pull all of these resources and talents to be able to push this type of thing forward. We talked about zoning related stuff, allowable uses. We talked about just being a good neighbor, right? People feeling more comfortable with the idea of an Airbnb in their neighborhood if they feel that they have a part in the establishment of the policies related to that, right? And then we talked about master planning, or just being able to just even believe in creating a community that might not have existed a few years ago. So that's what I've heard. I think that this is a conversation that can continue. I would love to see people's comments about this conversation we had today. And I'm gonna pass it to Mike and Chi Chi to really close this out.
No, I would agree completely. I think that was a great summary. I think that there's a ton of opportunity, and I think that a reoccurring theme was vision. Just having the vision that things can turn around, that just with a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of vision, and what she said, and I, absolutely let her say it herself. But what is the neighborhood? In terms of the people, like the culture and the connectivity and the identity. And I think that those things are like the bedrock foundation that can drive things forward.
Well said, everybody. And I'll finish with, we've got work to do.
Yes.
That's what I heard. Like, I heard that we've got work to do. We got, neighborhoods to identify, residents and organizations to identify, to get this going, because I think this is something that we could definitely do and replicate in Detroit. And I'm excited.
Well, with that, I'm just gonna say the block is under construction, right? We're a constant movement every day, and we need to figure out ways to improve the community. All right. Bye.
Peace.
Thank you all.